I'll just link the other pad in here. We have a couple topics on there. A bit things everyone in here is actually already aware of from talks in the stand-ups recently. The first one is our timeouts. So we discussed this a bit before, that we have that issue. I don't have the tracker linked, or actually, is that the right tracker? Yeah, that is the right tracker. So the RBD tracker is linked in the other pad as well. Let's take an example of this issue in the manager module, where if you have any of these SSH commands, like a Ceph volume command or something that ends up hanging, then the entire serve loop hangs up permanently, so you restart it. So there was some discussion about introducing some timeouts to our SSH commands, but we never finalized anything because it ended up being a bit tricky, because if you try to set, like, say, a global timeout, then it's hard to find a sort of good spot for it, because if you make it too long, then it's not, doesn't really do very much. Like if you have to wait 20 minutes to run this command of timeout, then you just loop back to the serve loop, and then it just does that again. It's almost never doing anything anyway. But you can't make it too short either, because some commands, like a deploy command, where it actually pull an image at the start of it, is going to take a few minutes. So either we'd have to actually do this sort of per different commands have different timeouts, or we'd have to have like a really long timeout and just say it's okay to have it, like just raise a health warning and have it be idle most of the time. One of those options. I don't know. Does anyone have any thoughts on that one?
I mean, you can also combine them to a certain degree where you start off by default with a very long timeout, and then per command, you could shorten it. If the per command value is like set and it's less than the global timeout, you can bring it down. That's I just want to mention that because it's not totally orthogonal to have global versus per command.
Yeah, it's true. A global default.
There was one thing actually. If I remember correctly, there is a 15 minutes timeout in the SSH protocol. And that's super hard to get rid of.
I thought we were
And
having cases where it was hanging indefinitely.
yeah, here. I found the issue actually here. This one. Offline host hangs serve loop for 15 minutes, found by Daniel half a year ago. And it's super hard to get rid of this specific problem, because it's some kind of a weird thing, because we are persisting the SSH connections in our SSH cache. And as soon as we are trying to reuse the existing open SSH connection to a host that is no longer there, we are going to hang for 15 minutes. And there is basically no way to avoid that 15 minutes hang.
Yeah, other than making a new connection each time.
Other than making a new connection, exactly. That was still remoto. But as this problem is with the SSH protocol and with the SSH implementation and not with the Python binding, I very much think that we are still prone to the very same particular problem. So we should probably avoid doing SSH connections to a host that is offline, where we know that it's offline, and you should probably first reset the connection if we suspect that the host is offline. Otherwise, we end up in this 15 minutes hang.
Yeah, it sounds like you also want to flush that cache At least that cache entry specific.
Yeah, I think at some point recently we added, I think it was during something I was doing with the agent, I ended up adding something to the check host that reset the connection each time. That's what we were. That's one thing we were running actually on um, offline hosts. We'd always still do check hosts.
I know that the agents have an open port. Can we just, if we know that there is an agent, I mean, Adam, correct me if I'm outdated. My information is outdated. Can we just connect to that open port on the agent if we know that an agent should be there, and only if we cannot connect to that host, and but the agent should be there, then we are calling check host.
Yeah, we could. I mean, the reason I've been avoiding that is because it was. I guess it's fine if we're calling check host if it fails. As I was worried about it being like we're sort of relying on this being like a stable thing. Like if it's there, it'll be working. But I guess if we're just saying as long whenever it fails, we'll just call check host normally. And otherwise, we'll just ping. Because ping, I guess, would guarantee it's online at least.
I remember Sage. I've implemented the ping protocol in the very beginning of the SSH orchestrator, and Sage removed it.
Was there a Y? I'm sure there was a Y.
I think the why was it's just not going to give you any usable information. If the problem was if the ping fails, you don't know why it fails, why it failed. And if it works, you don't know if checkhouse actually succeeds. I guess that was the reason Sage removed it. It doesn't give you any information. Ping might fail just because the ping protocol is disabled by a firewall. So there's a high chance.
Literal ping, as an
Literal
ICMP
ping.
ping. Okay.
Yeah, ICMP ping.
I guess for the agent one, I guess because we know that port, it works for
Exactly.
sorry, we can use it. Yeah, I guess that could be a good preliminary check. We can I think I said ping the agent. I kind of meant to send a message to it saying that just implement a little smaller because right now it's like actual updates and stuff you'd send there. I implement that's like an empty JSON or something and just see if we get something back because it does respond. And we can do that. And at least then if that works, we can guarantee it's online and we're fine. And if it doesn't work, maybe reset the connection and try a check host. I mean, it's almost more of our second topic on the agenda than the first one, but I guess they kind of go together.
The looming 15 minutes of the SSH protocol is really evil if we want to provide something, some user experience that actually kind of works. 15 minutes is way too long for anyone to be to think of a normal timeout.
Yeah. I mean, that could be a starting point though. It's just if there is an agent up, we can try to use its port to verify it's online. And then if it doesn't, that fails for whatever reason, that we don't get anything back, then we can be a bit more cautious and try to reset the connections instead of just running a normal check host.
Mm.
Be a good starting spot. So I guess so. So I guess if we already have a timeout, though, the introducing some other timeouts probably not going to help us too much. We could do is if we could recognize that the timeout actually happened, we could raise a help warning. That's one thing we're not doing. And the agent's not even enabled by default anyway right now, so I want something there regardless. But I think that could be a way forward with that.
Seems reasonable to me.
The other plan.
So I think this touches like on the other subtlety of this issue, because there's the issue of detecting that the host is offline. But in the case of the RBD failure, the host was online, but simply in a live lock state. So we were attempting to inventory devices, and we were blocked in an uninterruptible state. So the process would never return. So the connection was valid, but it was simply holding the global Ceph ADM lock. And when something like this occurs, there's no real good indication of what the orchestrator is doing on that host. It just appears to be hung or stuck. And I think in those cases, we need some sort of trigger to say, this is the operation we're attempting to perform, and raise a health warning. But that's not occurring. I've seen a similar thing if image fail pools happen in the background. They'll just silently fail over and over and over on a individual host without progressing in the serve loop, which creates the appearance that the manager's hung, but it's really not. It's just kind of in a live lock state in the serve loop.
Yeah.
Turns out.
Sorry, you can say.
Okay. Turns out Rito just today looked into the locking of Ceph ADM, and turns out that we are locking indefinitely, trying to get a hold of the Ceph ADM global lock indefinitely. There is no timeout.
Correct. Yep. And that's part of the issues. You can have two processes competing for that lock. One of them holding it and it'll never release it, and someone else who can never acquire it.
I'm gonna ask you, so do these ones that fail like this, it's not an offline host, it's just something stuck, do those ones never come back? Just permanent? Or do they actually come back at 15 minutes as well?
You're talking about the RBD issue?
Yeah, things like that.
No, that one never marked the host as offline because the SSH connection was still active. It was just simply waiting for the Ceph volume command to return. Okay. And so just indefinitely bluffed, essentially.
We probably do need some sort of timeout for those cases.
The other thing that this is a little bit more ambitious maybe, or just, my own ignorance. Are these commands like fully synchronous, as in, for thread X or for host X, the system only does this one thing until the command completes with a response? Or is it like, are there any async components where it's like, I've started operation X on host Y, but I haven't gotten a response yet?
They're like mostly synchronous because there's like a certain order the serve loop does things in, and it kind of like has to happen in that order. So it's hard to have a bunch of async things and then get them later.
I mean, internally we're using the async SSH libraries, so we don't lose control of the. We're not losing control. We could. I think, Melissa, do you know if the async SSH library supports some kind of a timeout when doing SSH calls?
Yeah, I think there is a timeout. It's like if like the process, if there's like a certain like if the timeout expires before the process exits, there's a timeout error that it can raise. And then also if the like SSH process, if there's also like it returns an error if it exits with a non-zero status. So it can return a timeout error.
What I remember looking at this, there's like two different sort of async SSH commands we're doing, where there's like an actual connect command, and then there's like the run command. And I feel like the connect one is probably Like, okay, it's probably the one that still has the timeout and works like that. But I think it's the run command that has the opportunity to hang forever. I think I looked at the documentation before for async SSH. I think the default timeout is just no timeout for those. Whenever we actually execute commands, when we assume we have like a good connection, even if the connection actually is good, then it just like it will just last forever. But I'm pretty sure you could put timeouts for that. I think when I was looking at it before, you had to set up some sort of SSH config object, and you could pass it in there, and it would do something like that.
Yeah, I think you have to like specify the timeout if you want there to be a timeout. I don't think we specified it, or at least like in the config. If it uses the sh config for the timeout.
Yeah, I don't think we are. Yeah, it would be nice if we, for those commands, had like it could be probably be a pretty lenient timeout, because again, there are some things that are slow, but if it could at least raise a help warning if that timed out, say which command failed, it would be an improvement.
Maybe we would need to extend the async SSH library to support it.
And I think it already does support these timeouts. It's just we're not using them.
There's also the possibility there's a timeout arg on the hidden Ceph ADM specifically that I don't believe we are passing or utilizing from the manager, which essentially implements a popen timeout.
Okay. Can we actually pass those, or is that just something internal?
I say it in the arg parser, but we never pass it. I don't think the manager ever applies a value for that.
Used anywhere? See it in the file lock object. Oh. And if that works as well, we could just throw that onto and any run the Ceph ADM, that function, include that there. We have to test if it works properly for cases.
Indeed, you're right, Adam.
I think these run commands are the ones that they're the risky ones right now. We don't handle it at all. I think this RBD issue is actually not the only time this happened. I'm pretty sure this was what was happening in the Giba cluster at one point. The third loop seemed to be hanging, and I think there was one host that had some hardware issues, and so the Ceph volume command was failing there. I'm pretty sure, and then also downstream there was a scale lab testing. There was a similar issue as well. Again, it was in Ceph volume command hanging. So it seems like we have two options here. So obviously what Sebastian just linked, there is that timeout for run commands, might work. And also, yeah, what Mike's just posting there, which is we actually have a global timeout arg, FADM. I think the global timeout one would be easier to implement as long as everything works.
Are we discussing the timeout issue we mentioned yesterday?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry for joining late because I didn't have this in my calendar.
Yeah, I can invite you to there or get you on the Ceph Unity calendar, I think, after this, where I normally find this one. Yeah, we're discussing options on like a more of a global level right now for the timeouts. So there's two options we have. Async SSH has a timeout option for run commands. That could work. And we also, Ceph ADM actually has a built-in timeout argument. So as long as we could verify that actually works for all of our cases, we could be just able to implement it with that.
just
one
to understand,
Go ahead.
so just to understand, so the idea is to rely on SSH for the timeout.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see the links that were in the chat, Bruno?
Check. Yes.
There's one Sebastian posted, 1121 from me. It's async SSH, the run command. That's what we use to do our SSH commands, those. And so if we included a timeout value there, that might fix the problem. Then we could at least have a timeout, and then we could raise health warnings. So it would be a big improvement over hanging forever. And then we also have what Mike Fritsch posted. Ceph ADM the binary has a built-in timeout arg that we've already set up. So we include that in all of our Ceph ADM commands, like a base timeout. It's possible that would also, we'd also do the same thing. We could let it time out and then raise a health warning.
I was going to say one way to kind of think about the problem too is I did not see in the documentation for the async SSH timeout whether it terminates the command or not. But so if the connection is killed, but say this process is still running, maybe it's got some kernel level locks running LVM commands or whatever, it's still there running on the host. Whereas possibly the timeout option to Ceph ADM might actually be able to, terminate the job running, and that might be better because then you have a better chance of knowing for sure that at least it's tried to free those resources.
I mean, in general, I think regardless of if SSH supports the timeout or not, I think we should not rely on some underlying component. In this case, SSH. If there is some timeout, it should come from the Ceph ADM and propagate it to the underlying component to have it like more explicit.
All right. It sounds like we're sort of in agreement that we should definitely try the Ceph ADM's timeout argument.
I would vote for that option, yeah.
So the second part of this question is what's a reasonable timeout, and are we walking down the path of implementing a crash loop backoff like Kubernetes? What is our strategy here?
And I thought the initial version of this was just to have like a fairly long one, and we'd raise a health warning and say like something is very wrong here, and it wouldn't be great. But obviously it's gonna be pretty slow timeout, whatever this is. But at least actually raise a health warning after say like 10, 15 minutes, and something's wrong. And technically we also wouldn't have a full hang, a server loop. We would still be able to do things that aren't whatever I was trying to do there. So that was my initial thought, what we would do.
I raised it yesterday because I was having a look to a bug, and this bug was basically the Ceph ADM stuck forever, waiting for the .log file. So that was probably a particular case, but we have more cases like this. So maybe it depends on each specific use case, so the timeout value will be different.
Yeah, I mean we have another example case in the other pad. There's a link to a tracker issue.
Is it in the chat?
I can relink it. I linked it earlier. You probably
Okay.
can't see it.
Do we have a
only
idea, a very rough approximation of what the longest running success, cases are? It's like, is it 5 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? Is it 20 minutes? That kind of scale. It doesn't need to be super exact, but that can help kind of create an upper bound on what you would want for a success case.
I think the challenge is many of the operations are actually quite fast, like within a few minutes, but we do know that inventorying devices, especially on a dense node with set volume, can take quite a long time. So
hardware variabilities.
Yeah, that's fairly
Mhm.
unbounded.
And we have a different thing, and that's downloading big container image as if you are by coincidence only connected very thinly to the internet. So you have a long time until you're downloading an image. And
Oh,
that's
like my house.
also unbounded.
And
How long should we wait?
is there somehow like to get feedback of the progress of this kind of operations, or there is no way?
We're not printing any progress.
I mean, not printing it, but if there is somehow um, a way to get the progress, some events, some feedback.
So for the container download, might be something, by default, Podman and Docker typically print like kind of ASCII output. I don't know if there's a way to get it to print, percentages, say, percentage new line. Then you'd have some rough idea that it was making progress. The hardware inventory stuff that Mike was talking about earlier, that would be harder because there's probably no established convention for that. Not impossible. And it kind of goes back to my earlier thought about doing some of these things async. If we know it might take a long time, it might be better to kick off an async process and then poll the results. But that's a bigger problem than the timeout thing. It's somewhat orthogonal, so I'm still in favor of the timeout. It's just, further down the road, we might consider making some of these long-running background tasks async based. Async not on the protocol level, not like async SSH, but like create a systemd job or something.
Yeah, that's a Ceph ADM agent, John.
Okay, great.
The Ceph ADM agent already does inventory of the volume asynchronously. So to the from Ceph ADM manager modules perspective, it's asynchronous.
Oh, awesome. Again, that's not
more of that.
Yeah, that's not like by default right now, so it's not getting as much, I guess, use. So people aren't making use of it yet, but it is checking that the volume inventory stuff and also the daemons on the host. It's querying those because that's also a fairly slow command, not as slow. They're talking like maybe 10 seconds or something, or longer one, maybe you get to like 10, 20 seconds, but still fairly slow as far as direct commands go. So we do have that stuff set up for those things.
Awesome.
The volume command that was failing with the Mike's tracker issue, though, the RB one, that was actually not an inventory one. That was like I think it was trying to set up an OSD on disk it shouldn't have. RBD one.
Well, I saw it in two cases. One case was a set volume inventory of a cell RBD device, and then the next iteration was attempting to deploy OSDs on a Stell RBD device that appeared available. In both instances, we solved that by just skipping over RBD. This could potentially happen elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's why you would still want timeouts or something like that, because you don't know, this command's supposed to complete in 1 second, but it's not. Versus, I know this is going to take a long time, so I want it to be async by default. So I think it's great to have both strategies.
Yeah. No, I think we're all kind of agreed that we want to try this Ceph-ADM timeout option. We just kind of need, I guess, a good reproducer for this to test this on.
Yeah.
See if I can find something out. Maybe I can just remove the patch with the RBD stuff.
Another option is we could artificially create a Stell lock.
Yeah.
Artificially hold the global lock.
But yeah, I think if we can get some good way to reproduce that and someone can test that this timeout actually still works and it comes back, and then we can just implement a health warning based off of that. That'd be a good starting point, at least. And as for the actual timeout we're setting it to, it sounds like, yeah, I think the easy sort of way to start with it is to set it pretty high by default. Maybe we can try to collect some information on how long these commands actually take, but I mean, it is always going to be hard to get like a max time on like these inventory commands and these pulling
Yeah.
image commands stuff.
And probably this kind of values will depend on the cluster configuration, the hardware, which could be very hard to figure out something that works always.
So I guess we right now I guess we'll start with try to set like a default pretty high, maybe like 20 minutes or something, and see if we can get health warnings to raise up. Yeah, with the Ceph ADM flag.
Okay.
I mean, if we make it configurable, and then someone runs into this particular timeout because his internet connection is so slow that he's running into those timeouts, or he has such a slow def volume inventory return time, he could actually increase the timeout on this particular cluster. So
Installation.
we would create an escape hatch in case someone by chance actually runs into those timeouts because something is too slow.
Yeah, that's good. Could we even then include information about that in the help warning we raise? We could say like maybe consider raising this timeout. Say how.
Awesome.
Yeah, good idea.
I really like that. Yeah, so I guess go with that, a configurable timeout based on the Ceph ADM timeout flag. Assuming that all works, so to test that. And then we raise a health warning, and in part of that health warning, we include information about the flag in case somebody's on some cluster with really slow internet, or maybe they have too many OS or too many disks on it. It takes too long. And I guess the default for that can be a bit lower than maybe a few minutes, 5 minutes or so. And they can raise it if they need to. I think 5 minutes is probably enough for most commands that are going to work. All right. So we all good on that topic? We kind of agree.
Just a question. I mean, normally the CFDM is launched manually and sometimes from the Ansible playbooks. Does it work this way?
So there's a few Ansible playbooks do very specific tasks. Like they do some pre-flight stuff. They install some things. They do like a purge where they remove the clusters. Most of the usage of it is going to be from the Ceph ADM Manager module, where it deploys it and then it runs an individual command with it.
Oh yeah.
But us changing something with these timeouts flags and stuff wouldn't affect the Ansible stuff at all. Be unrelated.
But do we actually care? I mean, purge is something that's done only once for a given cluster.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we need to worry about it right now. Somebody runs into a problem with it. I mean, even if they do, like, I don't know what you would do if the purge times out. It's just gonna fail anyway. They probably end up in a similar spot. They're gonna tell us it's hanging. They're gonna tell us.
Okay.
I don't think we need to worry about it right now. That sounds good for that topic, I think. I said we're gonna have the timeout, configurable timeout with the Ceph ADM timeout flag. See if that works. We'll raise a help warning, telling people to maybe raise a timeout or if something's wrong. Okay. And then our other topic we had on here was testing an offline host. So we kind of already went over that one earlier when we were trying to discuss the timeout stuff. So I think the idea there was if we have an agent, we can check its port. We can sends it a quick message, and if we get an acknowledgement back, we know the host is online and we're all good. And if it fails, then we're a bit more cautious and we try to reset our connection. And then maybe do a normal check host or something, only if we have to. So I don't know, does anyone have any more thoughts on that one, or is that one also?
They are closely related, right?
I mean, the timeouts will help this as well, because if we
Yeah.
do this check host and that has a problem for whatever reason that's hanging, the timeout will help with that. But they are like, I mean, I guess they're both good changes. They're sort of like tangentially related.
Yeah, I mean, the question I had is how quickly would this procedure detect the offline host? Because for NFS service, we wanted to detect that the host, NFS host failed within an order of 30 seconds, right? Or a minute.
So if it works and we reset the connection before running check host, it's fairly fast. I think the biggest risk in this situation is if we were already, like say the serve loop was running and it like called check host first before we got a chance to detect it when like one of the agents comes back or anything, one of those threads, and then that one would be on the normal timeout. And if the serve loop is waiting on that timeout, then we can't actually tell it to go redeploy the NFS daemons where we want them to. But I'm not sure really what to do about that other than just not caching SSH connections, because there's always going to be a risk that like it could go offline at this exact moment right before we run this. Like you never know exactly when it's going to happen. Any SSH command we do, there's a risk that it'll do that. But we'd have to not cache them, I think, in order to avoid that.
Lifetime currently for them, or are they just cached indefinitely?
I think there is a timeout on that. Not sure. Anyone know if do we time out the SSH connections we cache?
I think they're cached like indefinite. Well, like there's some calls to like reset connection, but
Yeah, you can reset
like
them manually.
but once they're in the cache, I think it's mostly just like they're there and you don't really know if they're like active or not. They're just in the cache.
How much of a boost do we get out of actually caching these connections? Does it help a lot? I think I've always done it since I started working on it. I don't actually know before we had this.
That was before the agent, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been like, even on Remoto, we were caching things, weren't we? Way back.
Yeah, it was slow. Creating SSH connections is slow. At which point do we want to get rid of that SSH connection and rely on the agent to push things to Ceph ADM?
I mean, it's not going to happen in Quincy because we'd have to set up being able to deploy daemons. The agent to do that.
Okay. There is a reason. Sometimes you're doing 4 different commands in a row. First check host, then Ceph ADM ls, and Ceph ADM list networks, then Ceph ADM device ls. And having to create 4 new SSH connections for each Ceph ADM command is extremely expensive. So even for a very few hosts, that connection cache is actually super helpful already. Even though it's only going to be, even if it's just one host that we are caching, even this is already helpful. So yes, I think we still need it.
Could we, like, if that's the only spot where we are doing like a bunch of them in a row, I don't know if it is. Could we like cache it at the start of that, and like keep a cache through those like 4 commands, then at the end of it reset it? Or would that still be too much of a performance drop? Goes back around.
No idea. Really, no idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna have to live with SSH for at least another year, probably.
Yeah. I wouldn't hurry with getting rid of the SSH connection cache.
Yeah, but it does
So
raise the question of like, what is our worst case detection of offline hosts? I think it's going to be pretty slow.
So just to understand how it works, so we have the agents, and what protocol do we use to talk to the agents? We use SSH or another protocol?
HTTP, the agent.
HTTP, okay. So for some stuff we use the agent, and for others we just use SSH connection to the node.
Yeah, basically everything can be done with SSH because that agent is still optional.
Okay.
But right now the agent's responsible for collecting metadata on the host. So it collects the daemons and the inventory stuff, and then it returns it back to the host.
Okay.
And then while the agent's active, we usually don't run those with SSH. We just avoid it.
I see.
Yeah, but we still need SSH for certain things. Like we can't deploy daemons with the agent or anything. So we need SSH for that stuff.
Can't get rid of SSH.
Yeah, it's going to be around for a while.
Sounds like one of the things that we should do, if it hasn't already been done, is file issues that say for feature parity with SSH, we would need the agent to do A, B, C, D. Then people can pick up those tasks individually, can make the agent capable of doing it, and that puts you on the road to eventually deprecating and then removing SSH.
That sounds good.
Yeah. We could do that. We could make one big tracker.
Yep.
And has a bunch of subtasks. Yeah, I'll add that to the pattern as well.
Are there, is it possible to use the agent in all the scenarios, or are they scenarios where?
Well, all of our commands we're running are just ceph-adm commands, and the agent's running with the ceph-adm binary, so it should have access to a binary. Always be able to do all the things in theory. I mean, the reason we're not doing it right now is just because it's not considered like a stable, reliable component necessarily. Yes. So there's a lot of changes going in.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think it would probably be at least another year before stuff. Even if we were to get all of this feature parity in, we would have to make sure it's stable. Or we'd actually consider getting rid of SSH for anything.
There is one thing. There is one thing which is hard to get rid of for the SSH protocol, and that's adding a new host. How do you add a new host to an existing cluster if you're not using SSH? You will need to invent some kind of a new way to initialize a trust between two hosts.
I mean, in the worst case, if it is only restricted to this use case, we can maintain it, but only for this very specific use case, till we figure out a better way to do it.
Plenty of options.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind just leaving it like because the problem we have with SSH seem to be these timeout things and things being slow and stuff, and only adding the host, that's not a common operation, so it wouldn't really be a big deal. We still had it for that.
Yeah, because the first time you deploy the host, you don't have nothing running on the other side.
I guess you would just need ceph-adm to be able to do that, and also to be able to deploy agents. Is that also obviously our SSH?
Yeah, a bootstrapping, not the current bootstrapping, but a bootstrap on a new node.
Yeah. So we need those two functionalities still there. and typically we could do everything else. But again, that's all just like this initial setup stuff. You should, in theory, only have to do once. And then I guess during upgrades as well, because you'd have to go upgrade the agents and deploy it on a new binary or whatever. But it'd be uncommon operations that you do these like little one-offs, and so it wouldn't be a performance thing at all at that point. Yeah, I guess we can try to look into that in the future. We can see if we can get some more feature parity with the agent to what SSH can do, minus those two things we're talking about there. In the meantime, implement the timeout stuff and try to use the agent port for some offline host detection if we can. We still haven't necessarily solved like the worst case offline host detection for now, but I'm not sure there is a great solution currently. Yeah, I don't know. Those are all my thoughts. About. Does anyone have any other topics you want to bring up the weekly? Then call it there.
Yes. Going to be my last Orchestrator weekly. Wish you all the success. And yeah, see you.
Thank you very much, Sebastian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody.
Bye. See you all later. I'll see you probably tomorrow.
Bye.
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 Right. Thank you.